We had two individuals that created a plan. They conducted research. They brought Rebecca Park to their home. They forced her into a vehicle and took her into the woods where they stabbed her, forced her to lie on the ground while they cut her baby out of her, ultimately causing her death and the death of the baby. This is as heinous and as awful the case as it could be.
Just keep telling myself every minute that she's gonna be found. Her and the little man are gonna be safe, okay. Having problems sleeping because for the last 2 years, every night, she's the one I was laying in bed next to times because I didn't get no messages, call from her, nothing. And it's just not like her because we're together 99% of the time. When we're not, you can ask anybody, we're always on our phones messaging each other, letting us know, each other know what's going on.
We're taught that mothers protect their children. It's one of the most fundamental truths we believe in. A mother would do anything to keep her child safe, except sometimes a mother doesn't. Sometimes a mother becomes the threat. On November 3rd, 2024, a pregnant 22-year-old named Rebecca Park went to visit her mother. She trusted her. She loved her. She had no idea that her own mother was planning something so evil, so calculated, so brutal, that a prosecutor would later stand in court and say, "This is frankly evil personified." What happened to Rebecca that night and to her unborn baby isn't just a crime story. It's a story about how the people closest to us can become our executioners. And the worst part, the evidence of what they did is still incomplete. Justice is still being pursued, and the answers people are desperate for are still missing. So stick with me as I walk you through every detail of what happened to Rebecca that night. The betrayal, the violence, the investigation that followed. You're going to hear what prosecutors revealed in court. You're going to learn who was arrested and why. And you're going to discover that one crucial piece of this puzzle that's still missing, the one piece that keeps justice incomplete. By the end of this video, you'll understand why this case haunted Michigan, why a prosecutor called it evil personified, and why a family is still searching for answers months later. But before we dig deep into the case, if you're new here, I'd really appreciate it if you'd hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. And please, drop a comment down below and tell me where you're watching from. I love connecting with you guys and hearing from different parts of the world. Now let's get into Rebecca's story. Before we talk about what happened to Rebecca Park, before we get into the darkness in the investigation and the charges, I need you to understand who she actually was. Because she wasn't just a victim. She wasn't just a name in a true crime case. She was a real person with a real life, with real dreams, with real people who loved her. And I think it's important that we remember that. Rebecca was 22 years old. Now, 22 sounds young, and it is. But Rebecca's life wasn't the typical 22-year-old experience. She wasn't just figuring things out or thinking about what came next. She was already in the thick of it. She was already a mother. She had 2 children, 2 kids who depended on her every single day, 2 kids who needed her to be present, to be strong, to show up for them. And by all accounts, she did. She was doing that. She also had Richard Fowler. He was her fiancé. They were building something together. They had plans, real plans, plans for a future. And in that future, there was another baby on the way. Rebecca was 8 months pregnant. She was so close to meeting her 3rd child that you could practically see the finish line. She was due in 3 days. 3 days. That baby could have come at any moment. She was probably feeling those Braxton Hicks contractions, checking the hospital bag she'd packed, thinking about names, imagining what her 3rd child would look like. Think about that for a second. Think about being 22 years old and already managing 2 children while carrying a 3rd. Think about the exhaustion. Think about the responsibility. Think about the way your entire life becomes about caring for other people. That was Rebecca's life. That was her reality. But here's what people don't always talk about when they focus on the tragedy. Rebecca was living. She was really living. She wasn't just surviving. She was moving forward. She had people who loved her. She had a partner who wanted to build a life with her. She had children who needed her. She had a baby coming. In just a few days, her family was going to grow. Her life was going to change in the best way. She was prepared for that. She was ready for that. So when November 3rd, 2024 came around, it was just another day. Another day in a life that was full and complicated and real. It was an evening like any other evening. She probably woke up that morning, took care of her kids, maybe dealt with the normal frustrations that come with being 22 and pregnant and a mother to two. She probably felt tired. Pregnancy at 8 months does that to you. Everything feels heavier. Everything moves a little slower. But she was there. She was present. And then evening came. The decision came up to visit her mother, Courtney Bartholomew. It seemed like a normal thing to do. Families visit each other. Mothers visit their mothers. It happens all the time. There was nothing unusual about it. Nothing that would make her think twice. Nothing that would make her hesitate or feel unsafe or sense that something was wrong. She was going to her mother's house. She trusted her mother. She loved her mother. These are the people who are supposed to protect you. These are the people who are supposed to have your back. So she left. She left her home. She left Richard, who was there waiting for her. She left her 2 children. She left everything that was familiar and safe in hers, and she went to visit her mother. Just before midnight on November 3rd, she left her mother's house. She was heading home, back to her children, back to Richard, back to the life she was building. She never made it back. That was the last time anyone saw Rebecca Park alive. That was the last moment she existed as a living, breathing person with a future and a family and plans and dreams. Everything that came after that moment took all of that away. And that's what makes this story so deeply tragic. It's not just that someone died. It's that Rebecca Park, a 22-year-old girl who was doing everything right, who was showing up for her kids, who was preparing to meet her 3rd baby, who had people who loved her. It's that she was stolen from all of them. Her children lost their mother that night, not gradually, not gently, suddenly and violently and without warning. Richard lost his fiancée. That baby that was due in 3 days, it never got to be born. It never got to take a breath. It never got to be held. It never got to experience any of the life that Rebecca had been preparing for it. And the worst part, the thing that makes this almost unbearable to think about. Everything that happened to Rebecca, all of it, came from the people who were supposed to be her safety net. It came from inside her own family. But before we get to that, before we talk about what happened in those woods or who was arrested or what prosecutors said in court, I want you to remember this. Rebecca was real. She mattered. Her children loved her. Richard loved her. That baby that never got to be born, that life was real too. November 3rd, 2024. It was just an ordinary evening in Michigan. Nothing marked it as special. Nothing suggested it would be the night that changed everything. Rebecca was 8 months pregnant, tired like she probably was most days, and like many people do when evening rolls around, she made a decision, a simple decision. She decided to visit her mother. Now understand this, there was nothing alarming about it. There was no warning sign that flashed red. There was no gut feeling that told her to stay home. It wasn't one of those moments where you look back and think, I should have known. Because how could she know? Her mother was family. Family is supposed to be safe. Family is supposed to be the place where you let your guard down. So when the idea came to visit, it seemed completely normal, completely reasonable, just a daughter visiting her mother. She told Richard she was going. She made arrangements for her children, and then she left. She stepped out of the home where she was safe, where the people who loved her most were waiting for her, and she went to see her mother. It would have taken maybe 30 minutes, 45 minutes depending on where her mother lived. A short drive, nothing significant, just an ordinary evening errand. But something was different this time. Something was happening that Rebecca didn't know about. Her mother and stepfather, Bradley Bartholomew, they weren't just sitting at home waiting for a family visit. They were preparing. According to prosecutors, They had been planning something. They had created a plan. They had researched what they were going to do. And when Rebecca arrived at their house, everything that followed was calculated. It was intentional. It was something they decided to do. Rebecca walked into that house thinking she was safe, thinking she was visiting family, thinking this was just another ordinary moment in an ordinary life. But the moment she stepped through that door, everything shifted. Everything changed. Because the people inside weren't thinking about her safety. They weren't thinking about her children at home, or Richard waiting for her, or the baby that was due in just 3 days. They were thinking about one thing and one thing only: what they had planned to do. The details of what happened next, the exact moments, the exact sequence of events. Those belong to the investigation. Those belong to the prosecutors and the police who have been piecing together this crime. But what we know, what the evidence shows, is that Rebecca Park left her mother's house just before midnight. She was heading home, back to Richard, back to her children, back to the life that was waiting for her. She never completed that drive home. That moment, just before midnight on November 3rd, that was the last time anyone saw her alive. That was the last moment of her life. Everything that came after was darkness. Everything that came after was something she didn't survive. The woman who left her mother's house that night was gone, and she wouldn't be found for 20 days. For 20 days, nobody knew where she was. For 20 days, her children wondered where their mother had gone. For 20 days, Richard didn't know if she was alive or dead, if she was hurt, if she was coming back. For 20 days, the people who loved her most were living in a nightmare of uncertainty. And the people who knew what happened to her, the people who had done this terrible thing, they were living with the knowledge of what they'd done. 20 days of silence, 20 days of searching, 20 days of hope fading into dread. And then on November 23rd, that nightmare took a different form, because that's when Rebecca was found. When morning came on November 4th, Rebecca Park wasn't home. That seems like a simple statement, but think about what that means. A pregnant woman in her 8th month doesn't just stay out all night. A mother doesn't disappear without calling. A fiancé doesn't vanish without sending a text, without letting someone know she's safe. Richard woke up that morning expecting to see her. Her children woke up expecting to see their mother, and she wasn't there. At first, maybe there was confusion. Maybe Richard thought she was still at her mother's house. Maybe he assumed she decided to stay over. But then hours passed, and then more hours passed, and still nothing. No call, no message, no explanation. The confusion started turning into concern. The concern started turning into fear. Because Rebecca wasn't the kind of person to just disappear. She had responsibilities. She had 2 children waiting for her. She had a doctor's appointment probably. She had a life that couldn't just pause while she was gone. So Richard called. He reached out to her mother, to her family, trying to figure out where she was. And that's when something strange happened. That's when the people who should have been able to immediately say, yes, she came over and this is what happened, started acting differently. The response wasn't clear. The explanation wasn't straightforward. Something felt wrong. And when something feels wrong, when a pregnant woman who's due in days suddenly can't be found and her own family is acting evasive, that's when panic sets in. Real, legitimate panic. The hours turned into a full day. The full day turned into 2 days, then 3. By day 3, it was clear that this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a crisis. This was a woman who was missing, a pregnant woman, with 2 children at home, with a fiancé who didn't know where she was, with a medical condition that meant every hour that passed was potentially more dangerous. Police got involved. An actual investigation was launched. Officers started asking questions. They started searching. They started looking for any sign of Rebecca Park. Posters went up. Family members made pleas. Have you seen Rebecca? She's 8 months pregnant.
I know that Rebecca don't go nowhere by herself. I know that me and Rebecca and Paige have had a thing in mind for at least 6 years now, that if something was to go wrong, we have Rebecca's okay to call the cops and have them come look for her.
And then they found something that made it even worse. The unborn baby was no longer inside her. Someone had cut the baby out of her womb, and the baby was dead. The shock of it, the reality of it. 2 lives, 2 people, gone, not lost to illness, not lost to accident, lost to deliberate, calculated violence. A pregnant woman and her unborn child, both murdered, both taken, both gone in a way that was so violent, so brutal, so intentional that it felt almost incomprehensible. The autopsy revealed the depth of what had happened. The evidence showed premeditation. The body showed torture. And suddenly the mystery of where Rebecca had gone wasn't a mystery anymore. The mystery was transformed into a crime so severe that it would eventually bring charges of first-degree murder. A crime so severe that prosecutors would later stand in court and call it evil personified. But even with the body found, even with the autopsy complete, even with the initial answers coming in, the mystery wasn't over, because there was still one piece missing, one crucial piece that would remain absent for months and months to come. And that absence would haunt this case in ways that nobody could have predicted. The body was identified as Rebecca Park. 20 days after she disappeared, after 20 days of searching and hoping and fearing the worst, the mystery of where she was finally had an answer. It was her, the woman everyone had been looking for, the pregnant mother, the fiancée waiting for her 3rd child to arrive. It was really her, lying in the woods, dead, not alive, not suffering anymore, just gone. An autopsy was performed. When someone dies under suspicious circumstances, when police suspect foul play, the medical examiner takes the body and they look for answers. They document every wound. They examine every injury. They create a record of what happened to that person's body. And when the medical examiner looked at Rebecca Park's body, what they found was a story of violence, a story written in wounds and trauma and evidence of deliberate harm. Multiple stab wounds, not 1, not 2, multiple wounds. Wounds to the front of her body, wounds to the back of her body, wounds to her face. Think about that for a second. Someone didn't just stab her once and stop. Someone stabbed her repeatedly, over and over, front and back, face and torso, again and again. That's not an accident. That's not a moment of lost control. That's intention. That's rage. That's violence that was sustained. Violence that was repeated. One of those wounds, one of the stab wounds, punctured her lung. A collapsed lung. That's a serious injury. That's an injury that causes pain. That causes difficulty breathing. That causes suffering. And it happened while she was alive, while she could feel it, while she could understand what was happening to her. But the stab wounds weren't the only injuries. Across her abdomen, there were extensive cuts, deep cuts, multiple cuts, cuts that tell a specific story, because those cuts weren't random. Those cuts were deliberate. Those cuts were made with purpose. And the purpose becomes clear when you understand what those cuts were accomplishing. Someone was cutting the baby out of her womb. Let me say that again, because it's important that you understand the full reality of what happened. While Rebecca was alive, while she was breathing, while she could still feel, while her heart was still beating, someone took a blade, a knife or scalpel or some kind of cutting instrument, and they cut into her abdomen. They cut deeply, repeatedly, and they were cutting her unborn baby out of her body. The baby didn't survive. The baby couldn't survive. You don't remove a baby from the womb like that without immediate, intensive medical care. The baby was dead, and Rebecca, bleeding from multiple stab wounds, from a collapsed lung, from the extensive cuts across her abdomen where her baby had been cut out. Rebecca also died. She died from her injuries. She died from the violence that was inflicted on her. When the medical examiner documented all of this, when they wrote it down in the autopsy report, what emerged was a picture of a crime that was unambiguous. This wasn't self-defense. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a moment of rage that spiraled out of control. This was intentional. This was calculated. This was someone taking the time to stab a woman multiple times, to puncture her lung, to cut deeply into her abdomen. Multiple times, over and over. This was torture. The word matters here. Because what happened to Rebecca Park in those woods wasn't just murder. It was torture. It was deliberate infliction of pain and suffering. It was violence sustained over time. not a single moment of harm. It was someone or someone's taking their time, making sure she felt it, making sure she suffered. The scope of the violence becomes almost incomprehensible when you sit with it. A pregnant woman, 8 months along, due in 3 days, stabbed multiple times. Her lung collapsed, her abdomen cut open, her baby extracted while she was dying, and then left in the woods. Left to be found days later by someone walking through nature, expecting to see trees and grass and maybe some wildlife. Instead, finding death, finding brutality, finding evidence of a crime that shattered the safety of an entire community. Because here's what the autopsy made clear. This wasn't something that happened in a moment of passion. This wasn't something that spiraled out of control. The violence was sustained, the injuries were multiple, the targeting of specific areas of her body, the abdomen where her baby was, it was deliberate. Someone knew what they were doing. Someone had a purpose. Someone had a goal, and that goal involved her suffering. The moment Rebecca's body was identified, law enforcement knew exactly what they were dealing with. This wasn't a missing person case anymore. This wasn't a search and rescue operation. This was a murder investigation, and they also knew exactly who to look for. They didn't have to speculate. They didn't have to wonder. They had a clear direction, and they moved on it fast. On the same day Rebecca's body was discovered, November 23, 2024, 4 people were arrested. 4 people who were connected to Rebecca, who had answers, who needed to be questioned. The first was Courtney Bartholomew, Rebecca's own mother. The second was Bradley Bartholomew, her stepfather. The third was Richard Fallor, Rebecca's fiancé, and the fourth was Kimberly Park, Rebecca's sister. All 4 taken into custody the same day the body was found. No delays, no waiting, no time for anyone to get their story straight or coordinate their explanations. That speed matters. That immediate action tells you something. It tells you that investigators had already done the groundwork. While Rebecca was missing for those 20 days, while everyone was searching, law enforcement was also investigating. They were asking questions. They were looking at the people closest to her. They were building a picture of what might have happened. And by the time the body was found, they knew who they needed to arrest. Each of the 4 arrested individuals was taken for questioning. They were booked. They were processed. And then within days, not weeks, but days, they were brought to court for their initial appearances. This is when charges are formally presented. This is when the legal system officially acknowledges that someone is being accused of a crime. And it's when bail is set, determining whether they can be released before trial or whether they stay in custody. The charges came quickly. Courtney and Bradley Bartholomew faced serious accusations: first-degree murder, felony murder, torture, conspiracy to commit torture, assault on a pregnant individual causing miscarriage or stillbirth. Multiple counts. These weren't minor charges. These weren't charges that suggested a small crime or a moment of lost control. These were charges that carried potential life sentences. These were charges that reflected the severity of what prosecutors believed had happened. When the judge heard the charges and heard what prosecutors had to say about the case, the decision on bail was swift. Both Courtney and Bradley Bartholomew were denied bail. The judge ordered them held without bail, which means they would remain in custody pending trial. No opportunity to post bond. No chance to walk free while the case proceeded. They would sit in Wexford County Jail, awaiting the legal process that would unfold. The judge's decision reflected the gravity of the charges and the evidence prosecutors presented. Now Richard Fallor and Kimberly Park, their situations were different. They were arrested, yes. They were charged, yes. But the charges against them weren't murder. Richard faced charges related to delivering methamphetamine, drug charges, serious drug charges, but not charges related to Rebecca's death. His bail was set at $1 million. Kimberly faced charges of tampering with evidence, lying to police, and filing a false report. Her bail was set at $750,000. These charges suggested involvement in the aftermath, involvement in a cover-up perhaps, but prosecutors made clear that neither Fallor nor Kimberly were being charged with the actual murder. Everything we've covered so far tells a story, a terrible, brutal story, but it's a story with an ending. Rebecca's body was found, her remains were identified, the autopsy was performed, the evidence was collected. Courtney and Bradley Bartholomew were arrested. They were charged. They were held without bail. We know what happened to Rebecca. We know where she is. We know her name, her age, her story. Her death has been accounted for. But there's another death in this case, another victim, another person whose life was stolen, and that person's remains have never been found. The baby. Rebecca's unborn child, the baby that was due to be born in 3 days, the baby that was cut from its mother's womb while she was dying, the baby that was murdered, that baby has never been found. Months and months have passed since November 23rd, 2024, when Rebecca's body was discovered in the woods. Months of searching, months of investigation, months of hoping that maybe eventually the baby's remains would be located. And still, nothing. Still, that child remains missing. Think about what that means. Think about a child that was never born, a life that was never lived, and a body that has never been laid to rest. Think about the family, Rebecca's other children, Richard, Rebecca's parents who might have wanted to honor their grandchild. All of them unable to say goodbye, unable to have a funeral, unable to bury the remains and find closure, because they don't know where the baby is. They don't know where to look. The child who was supposed to complete their family is simply gone. Courtney Bartholomew and Bradley Bartholomew know where the baby is. They cut the child from Rebecca's body. They were there in those woods. They would know what happened to those remains. They would know where they were left, buried, or disposed of. But they're not talking. They're sitting in Wexford County Jail, facing life sentences, and they're choosing silence about where their grandchild is. That silence is powerful. That refusal to speak is a choice. They're exercising their right not to incriminate themselves further. They're exercising their legal right to remain silent. But the cost of that silence is enormous, because it means an entire family remains in limbo. It means investigators can't close this chapter. It means justice, complete, comprehensive justice, remains incomplete. Investigators have been searching. Even months after the body was found, even months after the arrests were made, even months after the charges were filed, the search continues. They're looking through the woods where Rebecca was found. They're following leads. They're exploring possible locations. They're doing everything they can to find the baby's remains. But without cooperation from the people who know, without someone pointing authorities in the right direction, the search is like looking for a needle in a forest. It's painstaking, it's uncertain, it's ongoing, because the baby's remains are evidence. That evidence could tell investigators more about the crime. It could potentially provide additional medical details about what happened. It could confirm certain facts. It could answer questions that remain unanswered. But without the baby, without the physical remains, some answers may never come. Some questions may remain unresolved forever. And that creates a particular kind of torture for the family. Because while Courtney and Bradley Bartholomew sit in jail facing justice for what they did to Rebecca, while the legal system processes their charges and prepares for trial, there's this other loss that can't be fully mourned. There's this other victim that can't be honored. There's this incomplete circle that can never be closed. A mother lost her daughter, a fiancé lost her partner, children lost their mother. But more than that, the unborn baby, the child that should have been held and loved and given a name and buried with dignity, that child remains missing. That child's story remains incomplete. That child's body has not been found. Some cases come to closure. The evidence is found. The truth is revealed. Justice is served. But this case, even with arrests and charges and a prosecutor laying out her allegations in court, even with guilty pleas potentially coming or trials being prepared, this case remains haunted by a missing piece. And that missing piece is a child. Months have passed. The investigation continues. Authorities are still searching. The family is still waiting. And somewhere out there in Michigan's landscape, in some location known only to the people who put the baby there, is evidence of a crime that may never be fully uncovered, a child that may never be found, a victim whose remains may never be laid to rest. That's the horror that persists in the Rebecca Park case. It's not just the crime that was committed. It's the ongoing consequence of that crime. It's the permanent incompleteness. As this case continues through the legal system, as Courtney and Bradley Bartholomew prepare for trial, as investigators continue searching for the baby's remains, Rebecca's story remains unfinished in some ways. Justice may come, trials may happen, convictions may be secured, but Rebecca will never come home. Her baby will never be born. Her children will never stop missing their mother. That cannot be undone. But we can remember her. We can tell her story. We can make sure that her death means something. We can use her death as a warning, as a lesson, as a reason for people to reach out for help if they need it. We can honor her by believing survivors. We can honor her by supporting victims. We can honor her by making sure that no one else ends up like her, murdered by the people who were supposed to protect them. If you've watched this entire video, if you've stayed with Rebecca's story from beginning to end, I want to ask you for something. I want to ask you to like this video. I want you to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss other stories that matter. I want you to turn on notifications so you stay informed. And I want you to comment below and tell me where you're watching from. I love connecting with you, and I want to hear your thoughts, but more importantly than any of that, if you're in danger, if you recognize yourself in this story, if you know someone who is suffering, please reach out. Call the National Domestic Violence Hotline, 1-800-799-7233. That number can change your life. That number can save your life. Rebecca Park deserves to be remembered, not just as a victim, but as a person, as a mother, as a fiancée, as a young woman who was doing her best to build a good life for herself and her children. She deserves to be honored. She deserves to have her story told. And she deserves to have people know that justice is still being pursued on her behalf. I know it's hard. I know leaving is terrifying. I know that the person hurting you might be someone you love, someone you depend on, someone you've trusted with your whole life. But I'm begging you, please reach out. Please call that number, 1-800-799-7233. Just call. That's all you have to do. Tell them what's happening. Tell them you're scared. Tell them you need help. And they will listen. They will help you. They will believe you. Rebecca Park didn't get to make that call. Rebecca Park didn't get to reach out in time. And now her children don't have a mother. Richard doesn't have the woman he loves. That baby never got to be born. That's what happens when we wait too long. That's what happens when we think it will get better, or that we can handle it, or that no one will help us. It doesn't get better. You can't handle it alone, and people will help you. So please, I'm asking you from the bottom of my heart, if you need help, reach out today, not tomorrow, not when it gets worse. Today. Call 1-800-799-7233. Text, chat online. Do whatever feels safe, but please reach out. And to everyone else watching, if you love someone who might be in danger, if you suspect someone is being hurt, if you know something, please say something. Please reach out to them. Please offer help. Please don't look the other way. Because silence is how tragedies like Rebecca Park's happen. Silence is what allowed this to go on. Your voice could save someone's life. This is Rebecca Park's story. This is what happens when danger hides in families. This is what happens when we don't speak up. This is what happens when we don't reach out for help. But it doesn't have to be your story. It doesn't have to end like this for you or for someone you love. Please remember Rebecca. Please honor her by living. And please, if you need help, reach out right now. 1-800-799-7233. You deserve better. You deserve safety. You deserve to live. Rest easy, Rebecca. Your story has been told. Justice is coming, and we won't forget you.